Oh yeah, my uncle's brother's cousin's office mate, he's real handy. He did the work. It was top notch. Well, the AC's 35 years old, but it works great, and I bet you'll get at least 10 more years out of it. You know, that big dip in the backyard, they thought it might be a sinkhole, but we think it'd be a great place to put a pool. Hey, it's Florida. There's so much humidity. Every house has mold. If you're a buyer and you're hearing these words out of a seller's mouth, I've got 2 words for you. Red flag. The inspection period when you're buying a house is some of the most important time for you as a buyer. Not only are you going to learn about what you're buying, but it gives you a flexible opportunity, depending upon your contract, to be able to get out of the deal. Every house, even if it's a new construction house, always has something on the inspection report. So make no mistake, I'm not saying that any issues are a huge deal breaker, but what you do want to make sure you're aware of is certain red flags that may lead to a much bigger problem that you maybe can't see on the surface. And that very first one is shoddy DIY work. Do-it-yourself projects are totally fine, but if you get the idea that this entire house has been put together by do-it-yourselfers who really don't know what they're doing, I would encourage you to look a little bit deeper. Evidence of shoddy DIY work would be something like anything electrical, or if they've done major construction, perhaps removed a wall. A really good giveaway sometimes is the drywall work, because if you're not a professional, usually you can't hide the stuff you've taken out. Second thing I would encourage you to look for are permits. Your inspector should do a search on what has and hasn't been permitted. But if you've got roofs, water heaters, big projects that have no permits on them, perhaps an addition or a remodel, that is a mixed bag because you have really no idea what you're buying into. And someday, if you go to resell this property, the buyer might want to know what the permits are. And if you don't have them, you could lose the sale or get in big trouble with the county. The next thing to consider, and probably one of the most common things I see on inspection reports, are the age of major systems. The water heater, the air conditioning, and the roof. Those are the real big 3 ones. In Florida, you can typically expect to get about 20 years out of a roof. And air conditioning can range anywhere from 15 to 20 years, though I've seen them last as long as 30. And the water heater, same thing. Maybe 10 to 15 years, but again, I had an inspection once with a water heater that was older than I was, and it was working great. The thing to remember in an inspection is it doesn't necessarily have to be a deal breaker, but it's something important to know. In real estate, age is not a defect. So just because something's old doesn't necessarily mean the seller is obligated to replace it, especially if it's in working condition. And that's a big one. When your home inspector is going through the house, they're going to check all the major systems and take a look at everything from a high surface level. And that's including your plumbing and your electrical. Now remember, an inspector typically is not a licensed plumber or a licensed electrician. So if there seems to be anything that's off or weird, perhaps there's a small leak or they're not quite sure about the piping, or maybe the electrical panel has some issues, go further than your inspector. Get a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber in the door to take a look and really see what's going on. And my next big red flag is anything having to do with foundation or structural integrity. This is another one. You better have a structural engineer on speed dial, because you and your inspector can't tell whether it's just a regular crack or your house is going to fall over. Not every single crack equals gloom and doom, but a structural engineer is going to be able to tell you what are normal cracks from weather or just settling versus what's going to become a major problem and a major expense. And yes, particularly in Florida, we have a lot of humidity. And a lot of times in a bathroom that's not properly ventilated, you may see some evidence of some mildew. But mold is no joke. Just talk to anyone who works for a mold remediation company, because those can be some really expensive projects. And again, it's gonna require a professional to determine, are we dealing with a little bit of steam from a shower and some mildew in the corner versus maybe some big mold issue behind the wall that's gonna hurt and harm your family. And the next big red flag, particularly in our area, is termites. Termites are the little creatures that we love to hate because they just screw everything up. But it's a really important thing to make sure you get a WDO, wood destroying organism, inspection, and have them check the inside and the outside. Some red flags for termites can be evidence of the termites themselves, or perhaps even evidence of their little tubes where they live, or wood that they've come after. But again, you're gonna need a professional to tell you what that looks like. And if a seller has an existing termite bond and they've been keeping up with it, even better. If they don't, check it with a fine-tooth comb and get a bond as soon as you move in. The path to homeownership is paved in red flags. But what I want you to remember is that a red flag doesn't necessarily mean that it's a property you shouldn't purchase. It just means you gotta do a little bit more research. And if you're a buyer who's headed into your first inspection and you're wondering what it's all about, I have a really great video that you should watch that's all about what to expect at a home inspection. I'm Lindsey Johnson, your resource for all things real estate. See you next time.